Ancestor, ancestor, take my hand. Ancestor, lead me on. Ancestor, let me stand. Ancestor, I get tired. Ancestor, I get weak. I get weak. My nose, I get warm. Ancestor, through the storm. Ancestor, through the night. Ancestor, lead me on. Ancestor, through the light. Ancestor, take my hand. Ancestors, and lead me on. In my way grows drip. Ancestors, please linger near. When my light is almost gone, hear my cry, hear my call. Take my hand, lest I fall. Take my hand, ancestors, and lead me on. Hear my cry, hear my call. Take my hand, lest I fall. Take my hand, ancestors, and lead me on.
Familo Wosoke, Kinlek Belga. I am that which walks with you through the torrential rains of life without getting wet. I am that which walks with you through the firestorm within, yet fire cannot burn me. I am that which walks with you through the winds of transformation, yet cannot be uprooted. I am the memory whose shoulders you stand on when feet plant on earth. I am the head that came before a book. I am the you in that mirror that you look. Say my name. I am ancestor. I am a gungun. Ashe.
Mojuba, Egun, Mojuba, Egun, Mojuba, Egun, Mojuba. Hear my cry, hear my call. Take my hand, lest I fall. Take my hand, ancestors, and lead me on. Ancestor, you are breath, you are bridge. You carry us over tumultuous time. You who can hear and answer with quick remedy, you are ready before we ask. You who can speak through tongues of trees and fire and water, this earth cannot hold you. We pound the ground and you appear, O ancient ones. You who can make lightning strike with the flick of a skirt. You who can make tornado turn with the spin and span of hips, take us there, to the place of knowing, to the hall that leads to the doorway of you, O holy ones. You of the first light. You who know the potential of possibility pulsing in the dark, deliver us unto our gifts. You who have sunlight in your fingertips, oh touch our drums. Make us hear the rising. Make us move a steady stump. A choir of voices so majestic. Heaven hides us in a tapestry of light. Oh, we are stars, blankets of wonder. Sky bright eyes seeing the invisible, visible. You who have returned. You have turned our faces so that we see ourselves. And we have found you again in places we would have never imagined. You make our limits infinitely long, our visions clearer with eyes closed, and even there, you still stand in full color, vibrant and eager to serve. Hear my cry, hear my call, take my hand, lest I fall, take my hand, ancestors, and lead me on. Lead me on.
Good morning.
Greetings. How are you?
I'm really well. It's like, good morning, ancestors. Good morning, communities. Good morning, beautiful sisters. Yeah, it's so happy to see you all gathered here to. I know we have a lot to talk about, but I also want to thank Sunny Patterson for the beautiful poetry, the art, the culture, the music that just keeps us flowing and
Mhm.
that allows us to stand steady in resistance to everything we have to face. So I want to first just introduce everybody. So I'm Joy James, uh, gathered together, Khadija Haynes, Marsha Hines, Myrie, let me know if I'm messing up your names, and Jalisa Jackson. So here we are. This is our launch of Decolonizing Feminism and plus Captive Maternal Agency. But let's start with the sisters introducing themselves and sharing why here, why now, and all the wonderful work that you've been doing over decades.
Yeah, good morning, folks. And thank you for being here with us on a Monday morning. My name is Jalisa Jackson. I'm based in so-called Atlanta, Georgia, an occupied Muskogee territory. I'm a mother, decolonial Black feminist, reproductive justice practitioner who has been organizing and politically educating at the intersections of course, reproductive justice, um, of policing, police violence, state violence, and decolonial feminism, really activating folks around that. In 2020, I founded a project called the Decolonial Feminist Collective after attending a transnational delegation in Bahia, Brazil, where I was able to learn from Black feminist organizers on the ground who are also confronting state violence, reproductive oppression, environmental injustices, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? And that experience really inspired me to think about my role in positioning as a Black feminist, living in the South, raising children in the South as a single parent, but also a quote unquote American citizen. So, what does it look like to recognize that positionality and also reject it and operate in deep solidarity with feminists of the global South? Sort of was the underpinnings of the Decolonial Feminist Project, which has also been a response to concerning trends that I've seen in U.S. Feminisms, but more specifically U.S. Black feminisms. Um, Before really having a grasp on decoloniality and decolonization, I identified as a Black feminist. And so I've been thinking a lot about hegemonic Black feminisms, imperialist feminisms, the weaponization of identity, identity reductionism, and how that subverts radical revolutionary feminisms, our collective liberation, right? And even that term, like, what does collective liberation mean? Hopefully, we'll get into that a little bit more. So yeah, I'm really excited to be with you all today. My political commitments are to ordinary Black people, workers, Black women, specifically Black mothers, um, who are doing the necessary daily survival work, thinking about how, what it means to love our children, to raise our children in a world that is set on their premature death, and thinking about social reproduction work in particular as a mode of resistance that is oftentimes marginal or marginalized in revolutionary left spaces. And so I'm excited to be in dialogue with the brilliant folks here, and I'll pass it to Khadija to introduce herself.
Hi everyone, my name is Khadija. I'm an tenant organizer. That's mostly what I do here in Brooklyn, specifically in Crown Heights. I work with an organization called Brooklyn Eviction Defense, and we help Black evictions. I do a lot of work around Black liberation, the Black intellectual Caribbean tradition. For a while, about 3.5 years or so, I was in the Communist Party USA, which I did a lot of work. I was the YCL co-chair, And we did a lot of work around just really bringing people into the knowledge of like obscured Black intellectuals that were in the party and or were not in the party, but like around that kind of like radical milieu during different generations. And yeah, like right now I also do like cultural work trying to uplift, collective consciousness of people around, music, hip hop, like underground hip hop specifically. And I also am working on a piece, I've been working on a piece for a while, around imperial feminisms in relation to Mary Turner. And it's ready, but I just wanted to make it a little bit better. So you can look out for that. Right now, I have a small piece that I've written, the resignation letter. You guys can look for that. It's also up on Unity Struggle Unity, which is a Marxist kind of like a online publication. And I identify as, I don't know, I can't say I identify as a Black feminist. I would say that I like this captive maternal kind of concept. So I guess I'll go with that, or maybe like a war resistor. But I'm definitely, because I think hedging against the way it has been so, the allegiances like certain Black feminism has to the state, and then its foundations. Um, for me, I just had to like interrogate that, and while I don't dismiss it, I just kind of not sure if to identify as a Black feminist. So I would just say like Black feminist adjacent. but but yeah, so I'll pass it to Marsha.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. It is so great to sit with you guys, to bounce with you guys. I believe in giving people their flowers when they're here to feel and see them. I want to shout out Joy James. I want to shout her out as being a safe space, one of those sisters who guides and supports, is always there with a listening ear as much as she is doing. That should not be said in silence. It should be said for everybody to hear and know. And I just wanted to start in that way. Um, I am also coming to this conversation really struggling with my proximity to feminism. I feel as though it's a term that I have long since stopped using. I see it as a very harmful space. I see it as a space that upholds white supremacy. I see it as a space that refuses to talk about itself, talk about its harm. Um, and that has kind of led me more to exploring and thinking about womanism. And it's not to say that womanism is a direct and whole and healthy opposite. It isn't. But I found myself, as we often do as Black women, thinking, if I had to spend time and energy to sanitize one of these concepts, to see myself, to see space in one of these concepts, where should I spend my time? And I felt as though, my time should be spent with something that community created, or at least started to create. And so I've been doing a lot of the work to really get a sense of womanism. But I'm happy, and again, that is who Joy is, because she's not, a person to kind of shut down and force people into, her position or her thoughts. She's created this space for dialogue, and I'm happy for that. I'm happy to think and talk through the concept. I am a now long in the tooth organizer. I work with women and girls with, and not for, and not on behalf of, with the women and girls of the Caribbean as they negotiate the unsafeties of the plantation society in which they still live. To talk about plantation society is not to talk about history, it very much is to talk about something that is still alive and affecting the lives, particularly of queer people, disabled people, women and girls. And so I too am an astute follower of the Caribbean intellectual tradition. You don't know how much it warmed my heart to hear you say that, girl. Um, and so also just thinking about doing this work in the diaspora. I happen to live in the unceded settler territory that is called Canada. And so also thinking about this work from a diasporic position and all that that means. And I don't think you guys really know how much this conversation means to me today, to come into these white spaces on a daily basis, the harm of them, the frustration of them, to just sit and center myself in this way with you sisters this morning is absolutely magical. And it is something that my soul really appreciates because of all that I've been dealing with in the last couple of weeks. And I really look forward to the conversation.
Thank you. I mean, all three of you. I feel, again, like Sonny Patterson's calling the ancestors to bring us home. Like this is a space. And I don't, there is no such thing as safe space because we're under occupation. There's all these various forms of imperial policing, on the physical ground, but also on the intellectual and the emotional spheres, right? But this is a space that we created. And so I want to throw out some flowers too, to all three of you and also sisters beyond this, because you guys have inspired me. Like I've said repeatedly, I do not come up with a concept like I just woke up and created it. It's the dialogue, it's seeing your work, it's listening to you, it's reading your work as well. Khadijah's statement leaving the CPUSA, and I've said before that I worked with the CPUSA decades ago. And so there's always possibilities, but there's also these moments when you realize that you're walking into a sand pit of sorts, and I'm not signaling out the CPUSA. I mean, we all have been in different organizations and worked with different formations. I'm very interested in, I feel like we should have a disclaimer here. Like, we are not anti-Black feminists. Like, no, don't, hey, don't spit. Nah, don't. So it's sort of this, when you bring up womanism, because then I think of Alice Walker, but then I think of Black feminism, I think of Bell Hooks. And, the Captain Maternal is not trying to replace anybody, gentrify anything. Oh, what is that? The real, what, babe, can you read that? The We Real Cool. Oh, you got Bill. Okay. So who transitioned and who's an ancestor too, right? So could we talk a little bit more before we unpack the concepts about the wariness around Black feminism? Is it tied to electoral politics? I know everybody's like, not everybody, but a number of people are waving the flag right now because, Black woman is, doing her walk thing, right? But then we're back as you've all been outside of the States, you've moved around the globe, you talk to people. There's a way in which our, quote, democracy as an imperial formation keeps chaining us to repetition. So I'm really interested if you could say more about Black feminism and then move on to how you see decolonizing it and what are the possibilities for the captive maternal as a mutation or as it stands, or you just do how our grandmothers did the quilts? You just take bits of fragments, leftovers, what people call rag, and then you make beauty, art, and comfort. It keeps you warm. So I want to hear what you say.
So I mean, I guess I can jump in on this one. The captive maternal is a concept that I have a lot of time for. It makes a lot of sense to me, and it makes a lot of sense to me as someone who has not only theorized about Black lives and Black freedom, but who has advocated, who has spent a lifetime on the front line of Black freedom and Black organizing. Two of the things particularly that come out as you develop the concept in thinking of the life of Erica Garner I think two of the points that are so critical that we really have to talk about and think about are finances and how our movements continue to be co-opted because of finance, and then this concept of unruliness. Because I think I identify and see myself as a person who is received as unruly. I don't know necessarily if I define myself that way, but I definitely am a person who will not be diplomatic to make other people comfortable. I see no usefulness in that. And I think that those are the things that really excite me about the captive maternal. They take us beyond this very sanitized, gentle space that is feminism, because that works better for some people than it does for other people. It also, I think, reconnects the movement to the folk, to the ground, because a lot of the women that I work with across the Caribbean, but specifically in Barbados, who are fighting for their freedom, don't have the time to fight for it in a polite or sanitized way. They're literally fighting for their lives, and they will flail, because that is what comes with fighting for life. And so for me, I think it is, those are some of the things that I think are most useful about the term. I also want to agree with you, though, Joy, that I haven't come here to prescribe to anyone what they need to be or what they should be. If Black feminism is where a sister is and that fits, absolutely. I have no problem with that. I think that our space should be plural enough for us to look at a sister's approach, for us to feel her heart, for us to feel her soul, for us to realize that although we call it different things, our philosophies are the same, that we all respect our ancestors, that we all respect our Blackness. Those, for me, are the non negotiables more than what we call it. I love the work of Bell Hooks. Audre Lorde is amazing. Like, I don't think that we could just separate ourselves from these ancestors and then think that we're doing work that is so profound and different from. And that is not how I come to it, but at the same time I have to name myself how it feels comfortable to me. And I know that that is something that Audre Lorde has picked up, my new name, right? And my new name has to be with all I know now in 2024 and all I've experienced, walking alongside these feminists and trying to organize with them in the Caribbean has not been safe. They bring a lot of the harm, a lot of the white supremacy, the classism, all of that they bring into the movement, and they do it because they don't come with consciousness, right? To kind of quote Rick Frere, they are not critical. They just replicate what the oppressor has done. And so those are kind of some of the things that are moving around in me and with me as I do the reading and as I come to this conversation. And I'm sorry for being so long.
No, I thank you for that. I'm over here nodding, about to nod my head off. I'm deeply appreciative of the situating ourselves, and I too have been and I feel like I've said this in maybe several conversations with you, Joy, like really struggling with my fellow Black feminists in the United States. And so I have been lucky enough to be able to go on a few delegations, once to Brazil, once to Cuba, and talk to Black feminists elsewhere, which has been really a saving grace for me. And like you, Marsha, thinking about Audre Lorde, thinking about June Jordan, thinking about Toni K. Bambara, thinking about Ndai in the Caribbean, right? Thinking about Ochi Curiel, decolonial feminists who are also situated in the global South and their orientation, and also their critiques of dominant feminist forms emanating from the global North. And I think, this kind of ties into a little bit our conversation around what it means to decolonize feminism. But, we, as decolonial feminists, we were grappling with coloniality, right? The afterlives of colonialisms, and recognizing the entrenchment of colonialisms, and even in how we produce knowledge, thinking about the coloniality of knowledge, thinking about the coloniality of being. And when I think about that, I think about how the global North institutions, academic institutions, nonprofit institutions, what have you, have been really good at sort of picking apart the very complete, or not complete, but the wholeness of our revolutionary Black feminist ancestors, cherry picking, what they find useful or what furthers their political project, which is oftentimes assimilation, which is oftentimes multicultural democracy, right? Which is oftentimes very situated in quote unquote intersectionality, which decolonial feminists criticize as like a multicultural, privileged, elitist framework that is not very useful all the times, or it's not complete, at least in its analysis of our conditions. I mean, really pointing us to thinking about the matrix of domination. But, even in study group, Decolonial Feminist Collective, we run a study group. And the other night, someone said, like, whenever folks talk about the master's tools, like when they quote that, they never say the rest. Like, and the rest of the quote is talking about these integrationist approaches to our work. And so I deeply resonate with the unruliness, right? I have been disciplined by Black feminists in my work. In my movement work, despite carrying, Black feminist politics with me and prioritizing the needs of those who are navigating poverty, which also was myself at one point, right? Like, also I'm thinking carrying the needs and priorities and the material conditions of my family members, despite me having feminist politics, the criticality, right? The willingness to practice revolutionary criticism, and also the recognition that no framework is complete in and of itself and is going to deliver us our liberation. And I have also organized with various formations, Marxist-Leninist formations, socialist formations, feminist formations. All of them are missing a link. And so I really appreciate the weaving, the threading, the quilting, right? Taking the pieces, leaving the pieces that are not useful. But I don't see how we get out of this deep entrenchment of neocolonialism, the co-optation of our movements, the counterinsurgency, honestly, that we're seeing without practicing a level of critique, of criticism, of revolutionary criticism, and honesty and commitment to truth telling. And I see a willingness to lie currently. And so I'm curious about what it looks like to return to the source, right? To pull from Cabral. And the source for me are a lot of these Black feminist revolutionary ancestors who were anti-imperialists, who were grounding with feminists in Nicaragua, who were going to Lebanon, who were in Cuba, right? And so my commitments, my political commitments, are not to bourgeois, middle-class Black feminists in the United States who have aspirations to join whatever position Kamala Harris has once she's in office. It's really to my political commitments and loyalties are to thinking with and in solidarity with decolonial feminists. They don't even gotta be feminists, Black women, Black people of the global South who are struggling against US imperialism and the boot of imperialism on their neck. And so, yeah, I appreciate this space to be able to speak honestly with y'all, because it's fraught out here, right? There's much to be done about that.
Yeah, I just want to pick up on this thread of, weaving and quilting. And yeah, Joy James has really been a light in my life as well, and has really uplifted me. I think I started referring to myself in my head as kind of a triple oppressionist, just taking from Claudia Jones's steel anti-imperialist framework. And so many of the feminisms, Black feminisms, completely have been gutted of that radicality, of that kind of positioning and that clarity of anti-imperialism, of a strict decolonialism. Because I find too now this word decolonialism has, people are trying to sanitize that too, like they did with abolition. Like it's being bled of its essence, its radicality, its substance. And people just want to put some decolonial something on something, and it means it's barren. It's absolutely, empty. And so being someone who I guess maybe, didn't finish university, I feel like a lot of the times, like the more elite feminists, black feminists, overlook, poor black women that they claim to be fighting for. Like, we are invisibilized in their eyes, and especially poor black women who may not identify as a black feminist. And that is to say, like, I have taken so much from, with all of her complexities, I think Bell Hooks is important to read, is important to study. I don't like, I was reading the exchange between between Audre Lorde and June Jordan. And I was literally like crying, like, because I was just like, these women, they're they're they have like points of, conflict, points of deep contradictions. Um, you know, Audre Lorde in particular. But these are our mothers. I mean, and when we talk about motherhood, when we talk about maternal, I'm so sorry if my this is what it is in Crown Heights. I'm sorry. Somebody's playing Biggie, like, literally. Okay. My bad. Okay. So, like, yeah, these are our mothers, and we cannot throw away our mothers, regardless if they're, because sometimes we have our mothers in our own lives, whether it's our aunties, whether it's our sisters, whether it's, our friends, and they're not always kind to us. So what are we gonna do? We're gonna throw them away too? We can't throw these women away. And so though I take issue and kind of thread out the contradictions there, I do feel like we have to be honest. Like, the shape that Black feminism has taken, the allegiances that it has built, it no longer serves the group of people that it claims to be serving. When we talk about, Toni Cade Bambara, who is, I think, lesser known than maybe like a Bell Hooks or something like this, she has one particular quote where she talks about maybe we need to move from notions of Black malehood or femininity into Blackhood. So that's where I'm at. I'm like collective liberation, but with a particular attention on the way Black women are cut down in spaces, in organizing spaces, especially. And it's interesting, you move in these organizing spaces and everyone is like, I'm a feminist, I'm this, and they like somebody was saying, compound identities to themselves, as if that makes you radical. Like, your identity does not make you radical. And I think people really need to like come to terms with this and grapple with this. And I think that we need to also come to terms with the allegiances, with the kickbacks, with the money that is involved with claiming to be Black feminist. I think that when we talk about sisters like Erica Garner, when we talk about Tamir Rice's mother, when we talk about just, regular homegirls working at the beauty supply store, is that money going to these people? Like, is that money going to these sisters? Or they're just completely blotted out from these conversations, as if you didn't build a whole career off the backs of these poor Black and brown women. So I really take issue with a lot of it, and I really feel like the very foundations of it to begin with was very unstable and fragmented, because I don't necessarily think that you can separate yourself away from an Elizabeth Cady Stanton. I don't necessarily think that it's so easy, because if that is your substratum, if that is your base, and everything else thereupon is built upon that, then it's going to be like a kind of disease thing. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's going to have like these infections baked into it. And I think we need to kind of really complicate that, because, the women that I know, the women that work in the, the restaurants and, the laundromats, I myself worked in the beauty supply store for 16 years. It was fucking horrible. Um, we're looking for these women, these academics to like hold us in solidarity, and kind of all you get is like they thumb their noses at, women like us. And I do have a sister who was in the party with me, And she was a more learned, you know, academic person, and we kind of clashed from time to time in our views and things like this. But one thing I can say is, you know, there's women that will always give space for you. And regardless if we have, you know, a lot of deep antagonisms with someone like Bell Hooks and Audre Lorde, and you know, a lot of these people, I think that it's not it's not good on our part to just totally dismiss them, but we do need to hold them up to the light of interrogation, and we do need to read, you know, works like, I know, like, for me what's helpful is Joy James's book The Captive Maternal, reading Joy's writings, interrogating some of these feminisms, and also I read Dr. Curry's work as well, talking about some of these things. And I just think that it's important for us to understand what we have built ourselves upon and what our name is attached to.
So I'm wondering, when you bring up Audre Lorde and June Jordan, are you referencing the positions on Palestine? Right. Does
Yeah.
anybody want to say a little bit more about that? Because I'm not sure if
Oh,
most of the
yeah.
community.
So I recently read a piece. I think it was by CBS, but then within the article there was like a more like comprehensive thing. So I went to go look at that, and the name remisses me at the moment of who wrote the more comprehensive piece. But there was Audre Lorde had like a very poor position on Palestine. Like she was friends. I think it was Audre Lorde and something Rich. I can't remember the white feminist name. She was
Adrienne Rich.
Adrienne Rich. She was a Jewish feminist, and they were calling themselves like Zionist, you know, feminists, like if that's a thing. And so Audre Lorde, um, you know, instead of uplifting June Jordan's voice, actually sided with these women and blocked June Jordan's essay. I think she wrote like a letter from being published, completely shut her down, shut her out. And there's a reason why Audre Lorde is more in people's consciousness than June Jordan is not. When you have positions like Palestine in the 80s, you know, and saying like that famous the famous poem that she wrote. Does anybody remember the name? Going Home. I
Moving to
believe it's Moving Towards Home. I mean, I wrote something like it's a homicidal rupture, you know, that we exist inside of it. Like to block your own sister, and it's so like had me so undone in myself, because I'm like, I know what this feels like, you know, to have your homegirl that you're looking to, um, someone that you're supposed to be uplifted by, completely shut you out and shut you down. And you know, we have to like the careerism, you know, the moves that people make, the allegiances that people form, you know, it's very very questionable. And I really took issue with this. And it's like, how do you talk all day and write so many poems and beautiful beautiful essays about like the strife and the hardships of poor black and brown women, but you have nothing to say for the slaughter and the rape and the degradation of Palestinian women? This is crazy. Thankfully she changed her position, but she changed her position because her sister challenged her. And I think that's what we have to recognize.
You know, I think if I could kind of jump in here, you know, and take us back to something that you said, my sister, like this missing link, this missing link in all of this. I think we have to be, I think all of us realize by now that the theory doesn't have a soul. The positions that people hold doesn't have a soul. A lot of it is baked into careerism and which ism a person has to be a part of to get the high powered speeches, get the high powered conference positions. I mean, all of this is laid bare in the captive maternal, right? Um, I think what is missing is honesty and commitment to truth telling. right? Yes, that resonates with me. And a part of the honesty is that really and truly, we can never have revolution within imperialism. The truth is, imperialism will never be an open space to the captive maternal, right? And so, what do we do with that knowledge? What do we do with that knowledge? And I think that where all of these theories, where all of these sisters before have kind of not broken that sound barrier, is that they have tried to find the answers that they're looking for within these harmful white Western white supremacist constraints and boxes. And I think that is what leads to some of the contradiction around things like Palestine. And I think it is why we are in this phase and stage of our politics where we are glorifying not the best of our politicians, but really the best of the worst. I mean, if we are honest, right? And I watch what is going on in the US now with no excitement because we do have a female prime minister in Barbados
Mm.
who sees herself as, I guess, a feminist leader, but yet we had to fight to close the last residential school that was disproportionately affecting girls in Barbados under this feminist leader. And the school is still not closed. And girls are still being deprived of their education, raped and abused by people who are supposed to be keeping them safe. We see these girls come out of this institution completely broken, can't function in the world, and we realize that this carceral system and its connection to imperialism renders these feminist leaders, it renders them useless. So I feel as though, and feminism doesn't want to take up those conversations. And so when I see the captive maternal come on the scene, like this is what I'm saying to my students, this is what you need to read. These are the questions. I don't have all of the answers, but I do know as a person, like I said, who's been working on the ground, these questions that are brought up in this book are the things that I recognize are the things that we need answers to, right? And feminism doesn't want to do that. It doesn't want to do that. It doesn't want to bother with that discomfort. It doesn't want to bother with the complexity and the contradictions that is embedded in a Black feminism that exists within imperialism. And I think that's why this conversation is so useful. Let's get to the point beyond all of that.
Yeah, for me, it's again, I appreciate this is like a sanctuary, right? And then, then when it's over in about 30 minutes, we'll go on and do what we need to do. But there are these concepts that you all brought up that are really important. I mean, so what is soulless feminism and what is soulless Blackness, right? Because we understand there's patriarchy, there's domestic violence, there's violence against women. We get that. But then where's the safe haven? If the people that you're supposed to, congregate with are also inflicting harm, like to be in those residential placements. Of course, the girls, non-binary, however they identify, are being traumatized. And we know because through generations, we're always trying to stabilize ourselves and our people because of the trauma that radiates from the state intentionally, right? And so when I'm hearing the absence of the soul, when I'm also hearing Jalisa and Khadija talking about revolutionary feminism, one comes to mind is this is an image that's stamped in my head for 40 years, right? Is Nairobi, Kenya, the UN Decade on Women Conference, right? In 85. And again, anti-imperialist women, including myself and some Black sisters, are organizing like flyers. We're going to gather together as women. The lead of the US delegation was Ronald Reagan's daughter, Maureen, right? Reagan. And then it was a reactionary Republican, right? Who created or funded the Contras, the death squad. I mean, there's a lot going on in terms of decimation of freedom of people who look like us. So when we're organizing this and hitting out flyers, we're getting a lot of attention until, and I'm not going to say her name, a prominent Black woman feminist who does, reproductive work as well as Jalisa, creates a counter gathering. And then their thing is like, this is about reproductive rights. So this is real feminism. Those women over there. And I was like, wait, we're from the same empire. What are you doing? But those women over there are trying to talk about imperialism and stopping nuclear war and ways, and they're not real feminists. And so because the liberalism is the dominant Kool-Aid or whatever that people are drinking, the anti-imperialist event shrinks to near nothing, and everybody else is on the other side. And I'm like, I want to go back to what you've all gestured to. Who paid for that? I mean, I was like hustling, as a waitress and, as maid, fortunately, unfortunately, whatever, because academia is a poison pill. I went through those channels, right? But it's like, I paid for my ticket, I paid for my housing. But it's like, how can you, like, in a matter of 12 hours, completely have all the exposure and the propaganda and the advertising? And then that's where everybody is supposed to focus on what I would call state feminism. Yes, we should have reproductive rights, and we are fighting for that, right? We should not be criminalized for homicide if we want to terminate a pregnancy. Or remember the sister? She went to the hospital. They told her the fetus was dead. Then she went to the bathroom. Then the cops come. They break open the toilet. They reach in the pot. Then they accuse her of a crime and they arrest her. It's like trauma on top of trauma, capture on top of capture. But then what are our alliances? So I want to go back to revolutionary feminism. For me, what I've been thinking over years, there is counter-revolutionary, which is definitely straight up FBI, police apparatus, CIA. There is anti-revolutionary, which you've all gestured to, which are our other sisters and brothers. Because, it's not just biological females who are feminists, it's an ideology, right? But how do we, without arrogance, without like proprietary claim or anything, how is it that we as emergent, or as y'all are on the ground, revolutionaries, we know to stay away from the police, FBI, CIA, but what do you do with the intellectuals who are anti-revolutionary? Because they're basically, at least the narratives I've heard for decades, grow up, join the party, which you already know, it's not the socialist or the communist or anti-imperialist party they're talking about, and get in line. And so, it took me a while to get here, but I'm trying to figure this out in real time. What is compassion and strength simultaneously? Because you haven't been bought, and they can't intimidate. But then how do we maintain a link, or do we simply move? I'm talking about the stages, right? Just move to Maranaj and do what we need to do and build security apparatuses.
Yeah, this is the question. And it's so interesting, your retelling of that experience in 85. There's just been that repeated experience over and over and over and over again. Even this year with the escalated genocide on Palestinians and the what has come out as a reproductive genocide, maternal mortality rates are high. Children are getting their birth certificates and death certificates in the same day. Parents are carrying bits and pieces of their children in bags, right? With this escalated genocide, there has been a call for RJ, reproductive justice, to take position, right? RJ is a framework that was coined by Black women in '94 and is an analytic that is that has an explicit tenet around the right to parent our children in safe and sustainable communities without the fear of or violence from individuals or the state. And there have been like rogue RJ organizations who have published a statement, right? Step one, say something, this is wrong, right? The bar is in hell at this point. But the national organization, the RJ organization that the founders sort of found, like this organization that they started, a multiracial organization that, you know, purports to have this framework that is grounded in an international sort of analysis. And what they mean is like the UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And we know that the UN is a white supremacist institution, but had been silent for months, this organization, and is looked to as the sort of the organization that leads this entire movement. And, you know, after several critiques, months and months of critiques, resignations from their board members, published a statement that did not mention a genocide, did not, it was very both sides or the situation in the Middle East type of statement. And, you know, some folks were outraged. However, this organization just had a conference this past weekend. Everybody was at this conference / party, right? You know, and so the question is like, what is to be done, right? I'm not interested in conversations where divestment is not on the table. How do we criticize these organizations, talk about the ways in which, who their funding comes from, who they collaborate with? This organization in particular did an event with a Zionist beauty brand who had a former IOF soldier on a panel. Yes, it's really flagrant and egregious. But then we will sort of still collaborate with them. We will still participate in coalition with them. What is the incentive for them? You know, like Jordan criticized Audre Lorde. Audre Lorde eventually adopted a more anti-imperialist position, an anti-imperialist consciousness. She published Equal Opportunity, the poem where she's talking about a Black woman or a homegirl Secretary of Defense or of Homeland Security. She ends up publishing Grenada Revisited, speaking about the US invasion of Grenada, Apartheid USA. And then she also gives that Oberlin College commencement speech where she speaks specifically to how much our tax dollars fund the Palestinian genocide, right? And so we didn't all start off as anti-imperialists. Like, let's not even pretend like our politic has been that from the beginning. You know, my mom brought me a box of like old things that I written in high school, and I was writing for the school newspaper, and I talked about how Obama's first presidency was so meaningful to me, right? Like young Jalisa was really eating it up, okay? And so it's a recognition that transformation is possible, that we can develop or evolve into an anti-imperialist consciousness if we choose to, right? But there's a complete unwillingness to practice any sort of revolutionary criticism, as Safia Bukhari would say, or any willingness to combat liberalism within our organizations and our practices. And so I'm thinking about, you know, Marxist feminist Andei, Caribbean Marxist feminist Andei, who was organizing with the Working People's Alliance, right? With Walter Rodney and them. She ends up leaving that Marxist-Leninist organization because they weren't prioritizing the material conditions of working women, unpaid workers, mothers, right? She begins organizing with the Red Thread, an organization that prioritizes domestic workers, unpaid caring workers, right? And that really sticks with me, right? As people, you know, like I read on how Europe underdeveloped Africa. That was a critical text for my ideological development. And Walter Rodney has been really important to my ideological sharpening. But like, there is no one theory or one sort of theorist that had all of the points, right? And so what I'm thinking about is autonomous organizing. Like, how do we make sure that the priorities of those who have the closest proximity to precarity, how we ensure that, you know, those priorities are at the table when we are discussing what our revolutionary agenda is, when we are deciding how we approach our political project. Now, this has been something that I have been holding as someone who also left an organization that was organizing within the Black radical tradition last year, where I also felt like, again, as a mother and someone who is thinking about caregiving, someone who's thinking about the miseducation of my children, someone who has a commitment, a political commitment to the next generation who will inherit the problems that we fail to solve. How are we ensuring that mothers can organize, right? Like, what infrastructures are we building, even outside of the nonprofits? Like, we know the nonprofits are not building the necessary infrastructures for us to do what we got to do, but neither are the quote unquote revolutionary organizations. Okay, like we're not building that infrastructure either. And so I see the issues that we're contending with as it relates to Black feminisms and the failures of it not being exclusive to Black feminisms. These are pervasive issues across ideology, across organizations. And so, wherever your set is, I'm going to stay over here with the decolonial feminists. But how do we autonomously organize? What does real divestment look like to ensure that we remain accountable? We remain accountable, and that we're able to build the necessary infrastructure as we navigate these state failures, as we navigate, as we will continue to navigate police violence, right? Kamala got on the stage to talk about the most lethal force of the military, like we don't already have over 800 military bases. I live in Atlanta, where they are trying to build Cop City. Cop cities are popping up all around the country. Abortion access, in my previous position, I led an abortion fund. Abortion havers are experiencing increased surveillance, are needing to travel long distances, are missing days out of work, are being criminalized by doctors and nurses. There's real issues that people are facing that are leading to premature death, that are leading to incarceration, that are leading to decimation of our underdevelopment of our communities. And so I'm curious less about like how we are identifying, but more about what does the infrastructure building look like? Yeah, I feel like I'm rambling now, but I'll pause there.
My sisters, I'm so sorry. I have to jump off to go and get on the settler colonial clock. I'm trying to find a way that it's going to be better and it's not going to be this. But until I do that, I am going to bid you adieu, and I look forward to continuing this conversation. I think just our honesty about putting all of this on the table and saying, here are all the problems. We don't know how to fix them, but here are the problems. I think that is a good beginning, because then we can be committed to honesty and truth telling. Thank you so much for sharing time with me this morning.
Thank you. Heart to heart, sister. Talk to you soon. Wow. Okay, so we have a long list of things, but it's not linear, right? Because it's kind of what you've all said. It's weaving. Like, we can weave on a loom, we can stitch these quilts, but also we have to stop people from tearing things apart. So as we think about going forward, what would you like to see? Like, if we're planning, if I know I'm using a lot of metaphors here, but that's the way my brain's going. Like, we're weaving, we're like quilting, we're planning. But I really like, because I know your mothers, the commitment to intergenerational struggle and intergenerational stability, and the ways in which, under the rubric or the umbrella of revolutionary, a lot gets lost or not spoken to. I really appreciate what you say in terms of what goes on the ground, that shapes reality and even the capacity to think. Because again, going to bell hooks, I respect, but I've also written, like, when, decades ago, when we were organizing around the so-called Central Park Five, which are now the exonerated five. And actually, Yusuf Salam was there at the DNC talking about how Donald Trump tried to put an ad in the New York Times to bring back the death penalty for Black and Latino teens who did not do the crime. But the NYPD was so busy trying to pin it on them that they let a serial killer of women, roam for a bit of time before he actually ended up in prison. So when we think then about the intergenerational commitment to our children, to our elders, I see, when I think of the captive maternal, we're in the middle, we're the fulcrum of the seesaw. You're balancing, right? You want your parents or your grandparents to transition with dignity. You want your children, you try to keep them alive and keep them out of a cage, but also healthy, not traumatized any more than, quote, necessary. How, if you were like, here, we're going to sketch going forward into the future, how would you like to see, because I talked about hooks. I talked, maybe I could be more explicit. It wasn't just hooks, it was other people, but she's transitioned. She wrote that the youth were guilty because she took the narrative of the New York Times. She took the narrative of the NYPD, and our quote, collective need to be safe as if we could be safe in this empire seems to be tied deeply into obedience and then being compensated for being good Black feminists or womenness or whatever. So we get a lot wrong because we don't go to the base. We don't organize. And I don't organize like I used to decades ago. So decades ago, I would go to court. I would listen to Yusef Salam testify. I would meet, mothers in Harlem. But we don't always have the capacity to do what we used to do. And you guys are different generations, so you're super people, so you could do everything, right? So what I'm trying to ask is, given the present shaped by the past, given the future that we will into manifesting for our communities and ourselves, how is it the ground becomes the launch for everything? And a majority of the middle class or the striving feminism, as Khadija said, as Jalisa says, doesn't want to be near the ground unless it's a photo op, right? And that's why Samaria Rice had a severe critique about using her 12-year-old boy being murdered by a white police officer, Timothy Loman, who never did any time. However you feel about an abolitionist, people have to be held to some kind of accountability, figure it out. But her severity and her critique was basically about pimping. So how is it, I'm going to be repetitive and I'll stop. How is it that we could be very clear that we have to be connected to the ground to even understand what the state is doing, and then not impose a leadership? As Khadija is pointing out, the class contradictions and how academics or certain degrees think that they know better than others. How do you see going forward that we could tackle those issues?
I could just chime in for a bit. I would just say, I don't think criticism, self-criticism is a serious thing. And I really think in order to be an astute organizer or an astute person, like, you need to have that kind of critical lens, internal critical lens, organizationally and within your own consciousness. Because there's no way that, and you mentioned this in your book, Joy, where you talk about the people who are on the front lines are the ones who are going to die. And no one is checking if you got a piece of bread. No one is no one is giving a shit. People have literally done, like, they'll be like, oh, you come into this, like, no concern for how the hell you're getting to this action, how the hell you're getting to this panel, like, whatever. People just want bodies on the ground. I can't always be a body on a fucking ground for you. I have a child, like, I can't do this. And so I think that sort of self-critique and organizational critique really, really has lapsed in the Western left organizing spaces. Like, it's completely decimated. And I think that because we have no concept of criticism, self-criticism, like, you can just compound identities to yourself and be radical. You can collect money and in your nonprofit and, exploit these women and say that, I'm organizing or whatever the case may be. And I think for me, like, when we talk about George Steiny and how the state executed a 14-year-old child, and then we talking about feminisms that have completely erased the killing of children. When we talk about, and this is going to be graphic, when we talk about Palestinian men who have had objects inserted inside of them, how do we negate these things and say and come up with a theory called intersectional invisibility to kind of center and negate this thing that is all connected to each other? I really think that we need to think about self-criticism and organizational criticism. And I think that while I am someone who does believe in a party, structure as a Marxist-Leninist, I think that like it really has to really be refounded, and our understanding of organizations really has to take on a different level. I like this idea of autonomous organizing, but it really has to be centered in care, and not a care industry care, like care that actually moves in a conscious communal way where you're not letting your brother or your sister deplete themselves um for for your career, or you're not centering yourself, because we could go, I love hearing a good speech. I love it. Everyone loves hearing a good speech. But if you're just positioning yourself all the time and you're not really centering your communities, I think that we're causing violence that we don't even know is rupturing our communities and rupturing our sense of our souls. And so I would just like to see, and I'm working with this in my own organizations. I really want to see people not really even hold other people accountable, but upend bullshit. Like, see something and really, really call it out so it doesn't infect and metastasize and destroy the entire organization. Like, so many times people notice things and they have these networks of secrecy, and this one is getting paid for this, and this one is moving funny style, but no one says anything because this one is respected. And the games, you know what I'm saying? Like the games, like how much more games do we have to play until we're all dead?
Yeah. Oof. I agree with the offering of we need to practice criticism, self-criticism. I'm thinking about a good organizer is self-reflexive, right? I'm also thinking about like our unwillingness to look back sometimes and practice that critique. Like, these were some of the misses of our struggles, and then we inherited some of those practices, some of those behaviors, and we're continuing them in these ways. And like, yes, I agree that we need to we need to be in the practice of criticism and actually see it as an act of love, right? A love for your people, a love for community, a love, a deep love for your, desire for liberation. And I'm bought in, right? Like I'm committed to that. I also the reality of being committed to that is that there are consequences to it, right? And it's one thing for it to be held by one or two people in a collective or an organization to be committed to critique. And it's another thing for it to be an organizational value and belief that is held at every level of organization. And so I think even in the demanding or the encouraging of people to join an organization, a lot of it has become just like a clique, like very clique type formations, like where we cheer each other on, which is great, like cheer each other on. There's a teach-in here, there's a webinar here, there's this event happening over here, and we all show up and we take pictures and we cheer people on. But the relational component, right? Like, a lot of these folks do not have interpersonal relationships with poor people, with working people, with regular, ordinary folks. Like, they are not present in their lives. All of the people in their lives are the people who are members of that organization. And a lot of the people in these organizations are salaried nonprofit workers, are academics who are solid, like they're good. And so we're like speaking to the choir a lot of the times. Like, there is not that commitment to ground with our people to really know and to understand what they are navigating on a daily basis. And so I appreciate the analytic around care, and not in the selfish care, as what I call it, selfish care. When they say self-care, there's a difference from self-care, caring for yourself to ensure that you're able to show up for your family and your community, and there's selfish care, which is deeply individualistic and about consumerism and self-management, so that we can be productive workers. A care that recognizes interdependence, a care that has an intergenerational commitment. We seem to be growing away from that. And, I really see value in, thinking about who we're in relationship with. Yeah, go ahead.
No, that's really important. And also I wanted to say, maybe we could look at the comments, because we want to be in relationship with like the people who took the time right in the morning to, people have pointed out that mass rape in Congo and Sudan. Decolonizing has, said really important things, as everybody has, about the settler colonial state of the United States of Israel, where Zionism, white supremacy, Jane Crow, apartheid are the order of the day here, there, and everywhere. Maybe if we can scroll down and look at some of the thoughts that are being put out on the table, because going forward, we want to be influenced by what other people who are bringing, food to the table. Yes, colonialism of knowledge, right? As we grow into this platform. So I don't know. There you go. Hey, Decolonizing. So good to hear from you. There you go. What's colonial Black feminism? Who wants to define that?
Yeah, I think, when I think about colonialism or I would say imperialist feminism maybe is a way of thinking about it. I would say it's a feminism that professes to have care and concern for marginalized people, Black people, global South people, non-white women, without acknowledging the roles of racism, colonialism, and capitalist exploitation in shaping their material conditions. This form of feminism often imposes a vision determined by powerful and elite actors, rather than letting local people, local women, gender oppressed people address their problems most relevant to them, right? And so it imposes what the problems are, very paternalistic in its approach. And I think it's important to name that it's not just Republicans, but also liberal feminists, right? That have supported things like US occupations, military interventions to, quote, liberate women in places like Iraq or Afghanistan, for example, right? And so very pro-interventionists, which speaks to the colonialism's aspects. And I think in doing that, it renders our own sort of patriarchy invisible, positioning the global North as progressive and forward-thinking, women in the United States as liberated, despite all that we know about the worsening conditions for gender-oppressed people, the disappearing of trans people, the murdering of trans people, the murdering of gay and queer people, the rapidly increases maternal mortality rates, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, it homogenizes women under a shared experience, which we know is not real, right? Uses universalisms. And so, yeah, that's what I would call a colonial Black feminism. And I would also say colonial Black feminisms utilize an identity reductionist approach to sort of hide the ways that hegemonic US Black feminisms is complicit and conscripted in forwarding the sort of political project of the United States or empire. I think that, the current sort of lifting up of Kamala Harris is a great example of US Black feminists being conscripted for empire.
And I would just add quickly, Linda Thomas Greenfield, right, who is the UN rep who has vetoed a ceasefire multiple times, So, and then also what comes to mind, and I've called them in New Bones Abolition compradors, right? And they're kind of agents of the state, would be Condoleezza Rice back in the day working in the Bush administrations and lying about weapons of mass destruction that leads to hundreds of thousands of deaths in Iraq and the destabilization of whatever sectors are progressive in the Middle East. So like these betrayals are baked into the state machinery. So I see the colonial project as needing Black women almost as figureheads, because it's like Black feminists save the day. We got Biden in instead of Trump. You can always trust the Black feminist. And then it becomes an abstract construct that works for the state and corporation. So that's just like my projection in terms of what it would mean.
I would also just quickly add that it seeks recognition from the state, these colonial feminisms, as opposed to freedom from the state. It works hand in glove, and you mentioned liberalism, like it emboldens liberalism and it emboldens fascism, like it works in lockstep with fascism and excuses it under the veneer of, oh, I'm a feminist, so that must mean something. But in truth, they're like selling their own people up the river for, a check. So I would add that as well.
I have there's a question. I don't quite understand what Mike meant, but accountability as a feedback loop for progress. Does anybody want to try to unpack that?
Accountability.
Yeah, we were talking about accountability previously.
I don't know if they're trying to say, like, I hear people use the term accountability to death sometimes in organizing spaces, and you have to be held accountable, like, but it's just like this airy thing that people just kind of say. But and really holding somebody to task in an actual way, I think it's much different from this kind of dry and arid accountability that people kind of like hold up in front of you. So I mean, I don't know exactly if that's what they're kind of hinting at, but I would just say, yeah, this kind of it's almost become like, even I was talking to my partner about the way in which ceasefire has taken on, like, it doesn't mean anything anymore. Kamala Harris is calling for a ceasefire. Tim Walz is calling for a ceasefire. They're not calling for one state, or they're not calling for self-determination for Palestinians. They don't even want to let these people speak, but they're calling for a cease. Like, it doesn't mean, they know it means nothing. And I think sometimes that people want to say, I'm holding this one accountable, I'm holding that one accountable, but they know good and well that it actually doesn't mean anything. It's not going anywhere. I don't know if you have any.
Yeah, I think also I'm curious about the how, right? So to avoid falling into the accountability loop and the way that we've seen it utilized, which I agree with Khadija about around the utilization of the term, I have found in organizing spaces that there aren't clear ways to do that. Like, there isn't a mechanism for accountability. There isn't a process that is outlined that is in alignment with the principles of, various organizations to do that. And so then it just becomes an empty term, and we actually don't ever end up holding anyone accountable, and we don't end up practicing any form of criticism. And so I think, the way out of that is, being very clear in the how. What is the commitment of the organizers in said organization to a process? Who's involved in that process? What's the investigation of the issue at hand, right? No investigation, no speak. What's our willingness to be in that? And how, I find that is deeply connected to our ability to struggle with one another. Our inability to have any sort of real process in which we address contradictions, we address fissures, we address any sort of aggressions or antagonisms. Our failure to actually confront this is leading to people leaving organizations, leaving organizing altogether, people becoming more disillusioned. And so to actually build, towards a resistance, towards a changing of our material conditions, we actually need to have skills in that. And I see that as a huge gap in our current context.
Are there, go ahead,
Oh,
go ahead.
I just wanted to add, like, when we talk about people leaving, like, there's been so many amazing people who have just, like, come through organizations and just have been, pushed out of organizations. I'm not only talking about the CPUSA, I'm just talking about so many of these organizations, and it's because they don't take the time to uplift and really nurture the kind of political consciousness and sharpness of their comrades. They let these people fall to the wayside. And then there's some people, you come into an organization and then they get so turned off from organizing that they just go the other way. You know what I'm saying? And it's because you did that. Like, you didn't take the time to nurture this person. You didn't take the time to really develop this person politically. You just kind of let them fall to the wayside. And I think, like, if we're going to ever be a serious movement, which I think is going to take a lot of destruction before we can build. I think things have to become decimated, unfortunately, before we can actually build something up. And in my own personal experience, really quickly, I just would say that I just felt completely isolated. I felt like completely shunned because I didn't have these integrationist kind of reformist, talent intense kind of views that, you're talking about militant. It's a little too much right now. So, you can go to the side somewhere. You know what I mean? So I don't know. I'm in an organization looking to, in the future join another party or something, but I really want to take the time to, and I think we should all take the time to really interrogate what is it that we really want from the movement. Like, what do we really want? Is it just that we just want to romanticize about a past time of, revolutionaries or whatever, or is it that we actually want to undo this crushing system that is, like, creating a bunch of people who are just walking dead? And I'm not even talking about, like, what you would just call, normal everyday people who are just unconcerned with things. I'm just talking about, like, even in these organizations, there are people who are just walking dead and saying things because they sound militant, or but they actually they don't hold truth to power in anything that they say. And they don't understand the way in which they're isolating people and hurting people.
Yeah, accountability connected to reform. So we did have a couple years ago accountability summit. So I'm not going to say that went well. I'm just going to say it happened, and I was part of it. I am going to echo what the other sisters has said. Whatever percentage, the language that is popularized is probably largely empty or void of meaning. One, because it's repetitive, and two, because it's shielding how much the state and corporation nonprofits have invested in the very notion of Black freedom, meaning to steer it away from Black freedom. It's like real estate development. We're going to gentrify this stuff. And then you can still have like the brownstone, or like, how about just one floor? But we're going to build high rises that are going to overshadow the very meaning of your culture and your lineage and your desire to be free, which would equal some form of a rebellion: intellectual, emotional, physical, material, political, right? I'm curious, if we're going to meet every month, if that's what we're going to do. We're going to invite people to come join us who can specifically talk about, this is what's going on in Sudan, this is what's going on in Haiti, this is what's going on in Brazil, right? But I feel we've inherited a Tower of Babel. So the words that we thought meant stuff, and that would be the slickest move on the state, is just make everything gibberish, right? So what's a feminist? What is it? Like, you get distracted by, like, oh, there's a rabbit, it ran over there. It's just like, how do we can articulate our desires to be free, but there are networks that have created like language as a barbed wire zone that every time you really talk about resistance, and I'm right, we're not going to romanticize people from the past, or even like, fortunately, people still with us now, because we can't replicate whatever happened decades ago. We just go forward with what we've got. So in the closing, what are some of your ideas of like people that we could, not every activist or is politicized everything about their history or I get, there's bank. People have monetized Black death. You killed George Floyd and millions, if not billions of dollars fled in. And then there are these pop-up movement things that just have millions and millions of dollars. No corporation pays you to free people. Corporations pay you to steer people. And so in our communities, which include everybody in the chat, even if they don't like what we're saying, which is fine, our communities, I feel, would have to rebuild language, not rebrand it, because we're not competitive in a market. But then what would that look like, 4 minutes, of some of the ideas for next month when we meet and we invite people to come speak with us?
I think from a decolonial feminist perspective, we don't have the answers in the United States, right? And I think a central component and commitment of decolonial feminisms is transnational solidarity. Thinking about, gathering spaces to share ideas, to compare notes, to understand various contexts. So yeah, I want to learn from Kenyan feminists who are active in the Ruto Must Go, that are actively fighting against police repression in Kenya, connecting it to police repression in Haiti, right? We need to be able to think across colonial borders. And so, yeah, I want to hear from those who are also feeling a little alienated as feminists, who are committed to the principles of feminism, as it relates to having a analysis of a big patriarchy when we think about the state, and the experiences of gendered violence because of US imperialism and militarism, and also thinking about how patriarchy shows up in our intimate lives and not dismissing that as secondary. I feel that we can look at and confront multiple things at once. And so I'm curious about hearing from people that are doing that in their daily work. With solidarity at the center, yes.
Thank you. So Khadija, you have the last word.
Yeah, I just want to say, I remember you gave a talk, Joy, I forget like which university it was, but you said like it's Black August, people will talk all day about, George Jackson, but like he's dying in prison and there's not really a movement to do anything about that. Mamie, I'm talking about. Mamie is dying in prison. There's not really a movement to do anything about that, but we want to talk all day about, Black August. We want Black August t-shirts. And I feel like I think our decolonial feminism first has to kind of interrogate feminist foundations and what that means. And I think that, yes, I want to see more transnational solidarity, and I want to see a critical examination of what has ruptured us, what has infected us, and how we can rebuild from there, and with a strong anti-imperialist core, because I think that has completely been gutted on purpose. I think it's been counterinsurgent. The counterinsurgent kind of moves to make feminism less militant and more palatable has really disrupted any sort of like liberation centered framework.
Yeah.
And
go ahead.
Just to quickly, I would be remiss to not say also that a primary component of a decolonial feminist project is to shift the geography of reason. And so it feels important as folks, on this live to really situate our sort of critique in the dominant forms that emanate from the United States, because Global South decolonial feminists are resisting military occupation. They are on the ground. They have taken up arms in so many different contexts. They have been in maroon communities. And so I draw a lot of inspiration from these contexts, and recognizing the differences, but also informing how I'm thinking about the limitations of Black feminisms in the United States, but also because we take what comes out of the global North as fact, and sometimes we apply it, sorry, my toddler's screaming, we apply it everywhere. It's important to recognize that the feminist forms that are coming out of the Caribbean, that are coming out of the global South, out of Latin America, from the continent, are not the same plays. They're not the same plays necessarily. And so, yeah, I look forward to getting into some of that in our conversations too.
Yeah, and so I will just close by thanking all of you. What, hon?
I thought more Claudia Jones, more Selma Francois, more Marie Ma'ani, less of, the Western feminist construction.
And thank you to everybody here. And we know that there are dedicated people who've been struggling and organizing for decades. We're focusing on the capture of that labor and how it can get rebranded and then become a market. So again, we appreciate everybody who's made time to check in, everybody for all your contributions, because you've taught me, you've taught us collectively, and we look forward to working in whatever capacity and to work with your suggestions as we go forward. And so it was good to see you all, and thank you.
Thank you. Don't forget to subscribe.
Sometimes the riot is a quiet one, where the battle is to love yourself and function in society, where voices of reason are muted by anxiety, like gaining notoriety is selling your soul. So we tend to go no deeper than the shallow water level, trying to keep us overhead in the face of all the slurs and the stares, mentally frozen, paralyzed by fear of failure and success. So we lock, stock, barrel, running while it's crumbling. All these towers and they're babbling, but the baby's in the bath and the stash under the bed on my head, spinning from the circles and the puppets and the strings that they pull. Then we move. Reactionary warfare never produces when it's on the field. Feeble and foolish. What tools and what weapons are we using? We need some new ones. Real revolution. It's real solutions. Well, we've taken on the ways of the ones who conquer with their guns and religion and division. Got my inner me looking like my inner